Hi everyone. We'll just give it a minute before we get started. Just let everyone join. Still quite a few people joining, so we'll just wait a little bit longer.
I always hate missing that very first bit of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Right, I think we'll make a start. So, welcome to our Open Athens Unpacked series. Today is all about understanding resource types, and we've got Georgie Cadman and Rob Smith with us, and they will be running the session. But before we get started, I just want to run through some housekeeping. Um, So, this session is being recorded. We will share the recording with you after the session today. So, it'll either be later on today or tomorrow, but that will be with you in your inbox, in your emails. Your microphones are switched off. So, if you've got any technical issues, pop that in the chat box at the bottom of the screen and I can help you with that. And if you've got any questions, pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and we will aim to answer them at the end of the session. And I will now hand over to Georgie and Rob.
Thanks, Liv. So, just a quick agenda for the sorts of things that we're going to cover today. So, we're going to be covering four types of resource type: federated, one-to-one, IP, and proxy, and custom. So, we'll talk about the benefits of each, when and why you'd want to use each one, what the setups and user journeys look like, and some demos along the way. So, without further ado, Rob, can you talk us through what we mean by resource types? Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Georgie. So when we talk about a resource, when we refer to a resource, we're really talking about your online content, usually via a paid for subscription. So you might be a university, a public library, potentially a private research institution, or really any kind of organization that wants to access online subscriptions, again, typically via a paid for sort of subscription, and provide that content to your users, which could be library patrons, students, staff, researchers. Really, there's quite a broad, different category of different types of users. But really, what we're talking about here when we talk about resources is linking that paid for content, that subscription, to an authentication method that your users can use to access that content. So what I'd like to do is also outline a bit of the terminology that we're going to use because different people use different terminology to refer to some of these things. You might hear vendor, provider, service provider, SP, and publisher. And we're going to try to encapsulate all of that as publisher. And you might also hear sort of journal, content, service, and resource. And we're going to try and be consistent talking about a resource. It's probably worth bearing in mind that there are lots of different types of online content. A lot of people use OpenAthens to access academic publications. That's one of the main use cases, but there are other types of online content as well. You could be accessing online portals, services that provide other types of content, or even provide actual services like research compute or things like that. But in general, we're going to try to stick to resource and publisher just to kind of be consistent with our terminology. So that's what we mean by a resource. And why do different resource types exist? Primarily because different resources offer different means of access. OpenAthens supports some of the kind of big categories. We're going to talk about SAML and IP-based access, proxy access. So that's kind of why those different types exist. And specifically, we're going to zoom in a little bit on the user experience, kind of the steps a user needs to take to authenticate into OpenAthens and access content, and the access management steps. So what you might need to do as an administrator to set up these different types of resource. The user experience is generally going to be pretty much the same with a few small variations. There are some slight different steps you might need to take to set up access to different resource types, though. So we'll talk about that. So I think I'm going to hand over to Georgie to talk a little bit about the first resource type federated
Thanks,
access.
Rob. Yes, so federated resources. These are our number one. So essentially, federated resources use SAML, which is essentially just the technology behind the scenes. So when you're part of a federation, it means the connection between you and that publisher already exists. Like that baseline is already there. So when you talk to a publisher for the first time and you're looking to buy a subscription from them, you might want to ask them from the get-go if they can offer federated access. Because you need to make sure that you and your publisher are part of the same federation. So whether that's the OpenAthens Federation, UK Fed, or in common. Once you've ascertained that you can authenticate via a federation, you'll then set up your subscription, share your entity ID with the publisher, and then if you're restrictive mode or using Athens Plus, you'll also want to then add that resource to a permission set. And you might need to be aware of any attributes that you might need to set up. But if a publisher should make you aware of that, but otherwise you're all done. If you're not sure on attributes or need to know more about them or want to know more about them, we held another webinar on that earlier in the Unpacked series, so you can go back and have a look at it. Federated resources are classed as the gold standard, which is why we're such big advocates. And you'll want to use federated resources wherever you can. And this is because of the benefits. So the benefits of federated resources that you're using that secure SAML technology, the setup is super quick, and it works with our redirect to link generator, which betters your user experience and therefore increases your resource usage, which is what we're all after here as well. So I will always note here that anytime you provide a link to your users, put it through that redirect to link generator. Again, there is a whole nother webinar in the series on that. So if you're not familiar with the redirect to link generator and you're an existing customer, please go find out what it is through that webinar. Can't recommend it enough. However, not all publishers offer federated access, which is why we offer other resource types such as one-to-one resources. So if a publisher isn't part of a federation, you may then want to ask them if they can do a one-to-one connection. So one-to-one connections or one-to-one resources, again, they've got a lot of different names. So you might hear them being called bilateral connections, direct connections, custom SAML resources. But it's essentially just a way to connect to publishers who do support SAML, but don't support federated access. So your one-to-one resources still support personalization through attributes, and you still get all the security benefits of using that SAML technology. I've already mentioned that you need to be in the same federation as your publisher. So you may want to ask that publisher who already kind of offers that SAML technology. They may be able to actually just go join your federation. And in which case, sometimes customers set up one-to-one resources just while you're waiting for that process to take place. Unfortunately, as much as I have just stressed the redirect to link generator, one-to-one resources are not currently compatible with it. There is also a lot more of a manual setup involved, but it's essentially just an exchange of metadata, giving yours to the publisher and taking the publishers and setting up in our dashboard, which Rob is about to talk us through and give us a demo of how to set one up. Rob, would you mind sharing your screen to show us how to set up a one-to-one resource?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Georgie. So let me do that now.
There's a bit of back and forth between the screens.
Hopefully that's showing the OpenAthens admin area.
It is. We can see it.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So yeah, thank you, Georgie. So as Georgie just kind of explained a bit of the difference between federated and one-to-one resources, I'm just going to provide a bit of a practical demo of setting up one-to-one resources. I'm going to click on the resources tab here, and I'm going to click on the custom tab. First of all, actually, I'm just going to show that under the available tab, you can see quite a lot of resources. And I think this kind of reinforces the point that Georgie was making a minute ago, which is that this is showing the resources that are available via the federations that I'm using. So that'll be the OpenAthens Federation, the UK Fed, in common. You might not be using all of those, but you're probably using at least the OpenAthens Federation. And the resources that we can see here are kind of curated by the federation operators. That's OpenAthens, the UK Fed, and in common. And these resources, you can expect that the technical kind of connection, SAML connection between the resource and OpenAthens is already set up and works. You'd still need to get in touch with a given resource, let's say a publisher, to set up your subscription. But that's you wouldn't need to do anything to kind of establish the connection. So that kind of shows that these resources are already available. But as Georgie said, there might be cases where you want to create a connection, a SAML connection between a publisher, a resource, but who, as you're activating your subscription, you find that they support SAML, but they either don't support federated access or they're not in a federation that you're using. So I'm going to click on the custom tab and I'm going to click create. By the way, just worth me saying that you don't need to worry too much about remembering everything that I'm going to show in this demo, because we have some links to our documentation which explains the steps that I'm going to show. So we have two options here, one to create a custom resource and one to create a SAML resource. I'm going to click the option to create a SAML resource and click configure. And at this point, I have the option to provide the metadata for the resource either as a URL or as a file. Now, both work. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference which you use. Using a URL is going to be slightly preferable if the resource provides you with one, for reasons that I'll explain shortly. But either will work. And this is something that you can ask the resource provider for as you're setting up access. As I was sort of saying, our documentation explains both how to go through this process and what to ask the resource for. I'm going to put in a URL that I provided, I sort of prepared earlier for this demo, and I'm going to click create resource. And what we should see is that an application service appears in the catalog under this custom tab. And from this point on, I can treat this the same way as a resource that's provided via one of the federations. So for example, I can allocate it to permission sets, which I'll do here. I can release attributes to it, which I would do here. I won't go into detail about this because as Georgie said, we have other webinars that explain a bit about attribute release and configuring SAML resources and things. So that would probably be a bit out of scope for this webinar, but essentially you can see that I can administer this resource here. So what I would need is a URL provided by the resource, by the publisher, let's say, to give to my users, to give them access. In some cases, depending on the resource, users might be able to navigate to the website of the resource via the open web, via their search engine of choice, and they might be able to select your institution via a drop down in the same way as lots of resources in the Federation work. That'll depend. The other thing you would need to do in order to complete this setup is provide the resource with a bit of information about your metadata. Again, that information is in our public documentation, which shows how to get that information and provide it as a link to the resource. If you're setting up a one-to-one resource and you encounter any problems at any point with that, you can click this little speech bubble here to log a query with our service desk, and we'll try to help get that working for you. One thing I'd like to mention as well is that the resources that are provided via the Federation are kept up to date by the Federation operators, which, as I say, is depending on the federations you're using, OpenAthens and or the UK Fed and or in common, you could expect those resources to be up to date and functional. The resources that you manage yourself, if anything changes at the resource provider side, for example, things like URLs or certificates, if they expire, for example, you would need to keep that up to date yourself. Now, I mentioned earlier on that having a URL is slightly preferable to a file. That's because when we have a URL, we can click this refresh button and we can update the metadata as long as the resource is hosting and providing up-to-date metadata. If you've used a file, that's absolutely fine, but you would need to, if anything changes, for example, get in touch with the resource eventually and obtain up-to-date metadata. And as you can imagine, if you end up with a large number of custom resources, a large number of one-to-one resources, the administrative kind of side of that could grow a little bit. You might find that you have to kind of keep on top of those resources. So that's one of the reasons why, as Georgie said, using the federated resources where they're available is preferable, because that administrative burden doesn't exist. Essentially, those resources are kept up to date by us. So I think that is the process I wanted to demo, Georgia. I think I'm going to hand back over to you now.
Thanks, Robbie. I'm going to take the screen again because this takes us on to, and I've always got to make sure I click the right screen. That one. So this brings us on to proxy resources. So we've discussed our SAML-based resource types, the one-to-one connections, the federated ones. And now we're going into a different type altogether. And these are our proxy resources. We have also hosted a whole nother webinar on this as well. I think it was called Do You Know Your Proxy from Your SAML? Also hosted by me as well. which goes into a lot more detail on the differences and nuances. But Rob, can you talk us through all the things we need to know today about proxy resources, particularly when we should use them? What's the difference between like IP and proxy and that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Georgie. So essentially, up until this point, we've really been focusing on SAML resources, whether that's via a federation or by creating a one-to-one connection to the resource. The other access method, which is quite predominant, is IP-based access. And I suspect a lot of people in the audience will be familiar with publishers offering IP-based access. Essentially, IP-based access is where a publisher will allow access to users depending on the IP addresses they're coming from. It's fairly common, has been fairly common for a long time, especially in in the academic publishing kind of world, to allow access to campus IP ranges, which essentially means that users coming from an IP address on campus will get access without having to really do anything at all. They'll just get access based on the IP address they're coming from. Obviously, there are some advantages to that. From the point of view of the user, there's no barrier at all to access. They can access directly from the campus range. Of course, there are some downsides as well. That's IP-based access is only going to work from those pre-arranged IP addresses. If users want to access from other locations, which is something that works sort of out of the box with SAML, users typically need to use a proxy. There are quite a few different proxy services that exist. We offer a managed proxy service, which is what we're going to talk about here. And essentially, the managed proxy service provides users a way to access IP-based resources from wherever they are. So the way that works essentially is by providing an IP address to the resource as part of setting up the subscription, as part of activating your resource, which is pre-arranged with OpenAthens, which we provide. And then your users will access the resource via either the redirector link generator. And as Georgie said, we have another webinar that talks a bit about how that works. And that provides users a direct link, which allows them to authenticate if they haven't already. If they have already authenticated, they'll benefit from single sign-on, and then they'll be able to access the content via our proxy service. The proxy service also has specific URLs that take users to the authentication point as well. So the other thing to bear in mind here is that in terms of the user journey, actually, it's quite similar to SAML. In terms of actually administrating this and setting it up, one thing to be aware of is that you probably won't see the proxy resource that you want in the catalog to start with. So if you want to add access to a proxy resource, you'll need to click that little speech bubble that I mentioned earlier on when I was demoing, log a query with our support team, and get us to add the resource to your catalog via our proxy. Now, we can't proxy every resource that offers IP-based access, although we can proxy quite a lot. So we would obviously try to support that. So I'd say the use cases for this, when you want to use this, is probably when you're setting up a subscription to a resource that only supports IP, that doesn't support SAML. One of the other things to bear in mind with IP-based access is that, generally speaking, there are some features that you get via SAML that are usually not available. For example, things like personalization. The SAML-based resources will sometimes offer things like bookmarks or customized service, which could be based on attributes that are sent to the provider, to the publisher, to the resource. Generally speaking, proxy-based resources don't offer that unless they do something extra to identify the user. So generally speaking, we'd probably suggest going for SAML as kind of the first port of call. But as I say, if you're setting up access to a resource that only offers IP-based access, we can attempt to add that to our managed proxy service, and then you can access that, users can access that via the redirector, via our proxy off campus. But I think that sort of covers the user journey and setup of the proxy, Georgie.
So a proxy resource is IP based, but for off campus essentially from anywhere.
Exactly, yes.
And am I right in saying then, Rob, for those who do access via IP on campus, so they get that great user experience, they don't get any usage stats, do they?
If users are accessing via, if you've provided campus IP ranges, for example, and users aren't going through any kind of authentication journey, but going straight to the resource, then that's right. So they wouldn't be going through OpenAthens, and we wouldn't be aware of them as far as reporting goes.
Something to be aware of, to speak to a lot of admins who expect usage to be higher for particular resources. And of course, if it's popular on site, it's not going to come up in your stats. So you might need to get those, they'd come up in counter stats, I would have thought, though. Thanks, Rob. So this takes me on to my next one, custom resources. So custom resources are our honorable mention from our MyAthens Plus users out there. So as we know, or may not know, your curated list of resources in your MyAthens Plus dashboard is determined by which permission sets your resources are allocated to. So you may want to direct your users to an open access web page, a general information website, like sometimes like public guidelines, something like that, or maybe you only have a few specific journals within a resource you subscribe to. So in which case you can set up a custom resource to direct your users to that specific journal, rather than just like landing on the publisher's homepage and expecting your users to find their way to like your subscribed content from there. Um, Custom resources could be federated resources, proxied, or any other type of resource. It's essentially just providing here's a card for some content that we provided you a link for. You can even set one up for a username and password sort of resource if you still have any of those. So where I've put a little screenshot there that Rob's going to show us now, where Rob showed us how to set up a one-to-one resource, there is another option next to it. We can just set up custom resource. They're quite easy steps to follow, and then you just allocate it to your correct permission set, and you're done. So Rob, just before you take us on to like the user journeys and all those sorts of things, can you show us setting up a custom resource and how it then comes across into MyAthens Plus?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Georgie. To that now.
Mhm.
I've just grabbed the screen again, so hopefully you can once again
Yep,
see the
we've got
admin
it.
area. Wonderful. So I'm going to click Create again. I'm back on the custom tab where I sort of left off a minute ago. I'm going to click Create. And this time I'm going to add a custom resource. As Georgie mentioned, this is kind of the alternative to a SAML resource. And I'm going to use, I'm actually just going to create a link to openathens.net. As Georgie said, this really can be anything. So I'll just click Create Resource. We can fill out all these fields, but they're all optional. So I'll just leave them for the moment. And what I'll see is that that custom resource appears here next to the demonstration app. I can allocate this to permission sets. As Georgie said, this is primarily for MyAthens Plus access, but I can't release attributes to it because it's not a SAML resource, and there's nothing else that doing that does. You can see on the allocated tab here, I've actually got 3 resources: a proxy resource, a custom SAML resource, and the custom resource. Now I navigate to MyAthens via the management menu. I just clicked on the management menu and clicked on MyAthens. Perhaps I did that a bit quickly. You can see
Mhm.
here that the 3 applications that I've got, 3 resources that I've got in the admin area appear here. So it's a great way to provide links to users. And you could, in fact, provide a redirect link here if you wanted to a resource that would take users through an authentication
Mhm.
journey. And what I'm going to do now is just very briefly, because what we've really talked about up to now is really mostly the resource admin side. So we've talked about setting up
Mhm.
one-to-one resources, what you'd have to do to set up a proxy resource, and what you'd have to do to set up a federated resource, which, as Georgie said, is much less, is very little to do. But what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about the user journey. So in terms of all resources to start with, often in the catalog there'll be an access URL provided by the publisher. So there might be a URL that users can click on, which will take them to the usually to the OpenAthens authentication point, or to your local directory if you've connected your sort of your user directory to OpenAthens, and then the user will be taken back to their content. Users can also access federated and one-to-one SAML resources, sometimes via the open web. So to say, they can Google, go to or whatever search engine, go to a website, and they can usually click a login button and they can search for your institution that way. But the other thing that I want to very briefly mention is the redirected link generator. So the redirected link generator under the resources menu, if I put in a URL for a resource, this is going to create a redirect to link, and that will, if I use that in a browser, that'll take users directly to log in, and then they'll be taken to the resource. That same process would work for proxy resources as well. So if I wanted to send users to a proxy resource, I can also use the redirect to link generator. For the one-to-one resources, I would need to use a link provided by the by the resource, sorry, by the publisher, and that really is the only variation in the user journey for users. So really, as I say, there's a bit more variation in the actual administrative process to set up the different resources. But from the point of view of users, really, it's just a case of either using a redirect URL, a URL provided by the resource, or searching for the resource and looking for a login via your institution or similarly worded button. So I think that really kind of provides the user journey portion of the demo, Georgie.
Thanks, Rob. So where do we stand then with single sign-on, like SSO? Like, because those redirected links like took us to our authentication point, and in theory, then if you were to have actually successfully logged in, you don't need to do it again, right?
Yes. So there are quite a few
Does that
different
work
ways you
for
can.
all the resource types?
That's right. Yes, that's right. That's true for all resource types. So there are quite a few different ways that one can use OpenAthens. You can use um, your own user directory. So, for example, you might be using something like Entra, Okta, other lots of different types of LDAP, lots of different types of user directory. And you can find again in our public documentation all the different types we support. You might be using one of those, and if you are, when users use a redirect to link, they'll typically be sent directly there to log in to the same using the same account they use to access other things that you other services that you provide as well as OpenAthens. In my demo, that's not the case. I don't have a directory backing my demo, so I was presented with the OpenAthens login point. The first time a user goes through Flow to access any resource, they'll need to authenticate. Subsequently, as long as they've kept their browser open for up to 8 hours, we will maintain a single sign-on session. So essentially, the user won't be prompted to log in again. They will benefit from single sign-on, and yeah, exactly. So that's
That's as long as
exactly
they're
how that works.
using those redirect URLs.
Redirect URLs, or as long as they're using SAML or the proxy.
Okay.
Yep.
Basically, always use the redirect to link generator.
It's definitely the most convenient way to access resources.
And I guess then, Rob, as well, like, I think we didn't really mention this. Like, if you were to set up a one-to-one connection with your LMS potentially, like Moodle or Blackboard or something like that, the moment your students or users, whatever you call them, log into that, as long as it's connected with OpenAthens, that starts that login session as well. So then, whenever they go on, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here.
Some people, so yeah, certainly as long as those services support SAML, you could do that. You could do
Another
that. We do
possible
have some
resource
examples
setup.
in our. Exactly, yes.
Right, I'm going to share my screen again because there's one last thing before we come to the Q&A that I wanted to share. So Rob and I have put together, wait for it to load. There we go. We've put together a table. Feel free to screenshot this if anyone is keen. So with different resource types and authentication methods, you need to choose the right resource type for you. So put together the table to show some of the key features to consider. So hopefully you can see why we much prefer the federated route. But it depends on your priorities. So if security is top of your priority list, you may opt to not provide proxy resources and just stick to SAML altogether. We've got a lot of customers who opt to do that. But if redirecting and deep linking is super important to you, then you may choose proxy over that one-to-one. It's all about making the right choices for you, but always discuss this with the publisher. Talk about your access method before you go ahead and subscribe. I'll just give you another moment for those of you who are desperately trying to find the snipping tool. I think we've covered everything in there as well, haven't we, Rob? That manual setup, sculpt redirector. Yeah. So
Yes, I think so, Georgie.
that moves us on to our Q&A. Liv, we asked if anybody had any questions before we came into the webinar. Did we have some come through?
Yes, we did. Yeah. So let me find them for you. Okay, so our first one is how can we make a case to libraries for them to transition from proxy-based access to federated identity, so providing both access and security in one go?
Okay, well, I can take this one, Liv. So OpenAthens is a product made by librarians for librarians, so it's built with the library in mind from the get-go. We're a fully managed service. I mean, Federated is, I feel like I'm a bit biased, but Federated is the superior route. It's quick, it's secure, it's easy. We are a fully managed service as well, so there's no like IT team to keep up with. There's a lot that you can do with us. We did do I think I mentioned the webinar early on, the Do You Know Your Proxy from your SAML. And we were accompanied by one of our lovely customers called Stephanie, who had migrated from their proxy instance to OpenAthens, and she talks about some of the nuances there about what improved drastically. Of course, you don't have to kind of give them both up altogether. We can do sort of like a smooth transition moving from proxy. Um, but yeah, I would highly recommend booking in a demo with us. If you contact, I can't put it on the screen, but contact at openathens.net and just book in a demo because we can look at your particular instance because everything's completely customizable and the benefits will kind of vary throughout every customer. So get in touch with us and just book a demo.
Thank you. I also popped a link in the chat to the other webinar you mentioned.
Mhm.
So hopefully
Thanks.
people can take a look at that. Next question is, are there any plans to make multi-factor authentication available for OpenAthens personal accounts as it is for users using a local SSO connection? Would that even be a possibility?
I can answer that one, Georgie. Liv, sorry. Um, uh, so we are planning to add multi-factor authentication to admin accounts, but currently there's no plans to add them to personal accounts. It's worth bearing in mind that in terms of the actual amount of traffic we get, a relatively small portion of it is actually OpenAthens personal accounts. The majority of customers and the majority of transfers use what we call local accounts. In other words, we're actually redirecting the user to the directory that's run by the organization. It's certainly not impossible though. It could be added to our roadmap. It's certainly something that it's worth considering. But I know it's not currently on the roadmap. So I think if we get more questions around that, and that's something for us to take to our product team. Yeah.
Thank you. And the last question I've got is, I'm looking to resolve an issue related to ACM's platform not supporting Easy Proxy, which is our current authentication method.
Oh, yeah, I can take that question if you want. So we don't. Our support team won't directly support Easy Proxy. As I sort of mentioned earlier on, we have our own managed proxy, which our service desk are obviously able to support, but we aren't able to support other proxy products. That being said, if you're an existing customer and you're using Easy Proxy as well, it might be worth raising a support ticket, getting in touch to see if there's any other access method we can offer, because it might be possible to provide support via our proxy or via some other means. So it's worth probably getting in touch with us to explore what the options are. Definitely. So yeah, worth exploring, I think.
Thank you. Georgie, I'll hand back to you now for the rest of the
Thank you.
Q&A.
There's some really good questions in here. Charlie, I can see a couple of questions from you, so I'm going to answer those first. What is My Athens? It's like a mini user portal that you can add on to your Open Athens subscription. Rob, do you still have My Athens up? It's probably not a great demo, so it doesn't really matter. But it's a page that you can set up that you can direct your users to that has like all your list of resources on. If you don't have your own LMS like internally. That's essentially what it is. I think have we got another session on My Athens somewhere? We've got all sorts of stuff on My Athens online. There's a free version and there's the plus version with substantially more features on it. And to clarify, all proxied resources need to be configured by OpenAthens support and cannot be set up locally by library staff. Correct. Yes. Fully managed service. We'll do it all for you. We do all the testing. We make sure it's all up and running. And why are some resources that allow IP access not able to be proxied? Rob, this might be a good one for you. And I don't suppose you know off the top of your head any examples of resources where this is the case.
Yeah, sure. I don't have any examples off the top of my head. But it's definitely true that there are some resources that aren't able to be proxied. It it varies per resource. And it depends on the website, honestly, the complexity of the website, exactly how the website works, exactly how they're authorizing access, what kind of service it provides, and honestly, how the website's been built. Um, so there are technical constraints around how a proxy works, which means that there are some services where we aren't able to proxy it. That's not the norm, but it does happen. I would say if you're having that issue, if there's a resource that you're trying to access and that we can't proxy it, or that you're having issues the best thing to do is probably raise a support ticket with our service desk, and we would probably look at that case by case. If we can resolve issues with the proxy, we would definitely, that's, as I say, part of the managed service. We try to do that. If we have to make changes, we sometimes look at doing that, or it might be sensible to look at other options for access if we can't get that working, and then that might be something we would talk to the resource about and try and see what the options are. So the
I
answer is
will
yes, it does
say
happen, but yeah, sorry, Georgie. Yeah,
also we do have an actual proxy team on the service desk. We've got a whole dedicated team for trying to support it. So always give it a go, and we'll do our
yeah,
best.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. The best thing to do is get in touch if you are experiencing issues with that.
Oh, this is a good question. So, do custom resources generate usage data in OpenAthens? I will say from the get-go, it varies. But Rob, did you want to kind of take us a little bit more in a deep dive of what it does and what it doesn't?
Um,
So, if it's
Definitely a good
a
question to put me on the spot. As far as I'm aware, SAML custom SAML resources should produce reporting data. If users are going through our authentication point, I'd expect reporting data to be produced. So yeah, custom resources where it's not a custom SAML resource and there's no interaction with our service will not.
But if it's a custom resource, so not a one-to-one custom SAML resource, is where we try to like streamline the terminology. So if it's not a custom SAML resource, a one-to-one connection, but it's just a custom resource, but that custom resource is using a federated resource, and you have put your redirect link in there and everything, that will count towards your resource usage for that one.
Yeah, what it really comes down to is whether the user interacts with
Mm.
our service or not, so whether that's part of their um, logging into a resource, whether they are sent to OpenAthens. They may be sent on after that. As I said sort of earlier on, they may be sent to your local directory, but really whether the user interacts with our service to make an authentication request or not is really the key thing.
Could you clarify some specific use cases for the custom setup? Assuming you mean just again, that custom resource where you can put any URL in there. There are so many use cases. So giving you one specific one that I said earlier. So we've got some customers who will subscribe to a rather large publisher, but only have a couple of subscriptions like to specific journals within that big sort of portfolio. So instead of allocating that one publisher to a permission set, they won't allocate that one, but they will create custom resources using the redirected link generator to the specific journals. And then in MyAthens Plus, those specific journals will appear. So again, instead of like you clicking on that publisher, going straight to the homepage, and they're just getting hit with the paywalls all the time, they just get straight through into the content that they've got access to. And equally, if you're using MyAthens Plus, then you kind of want that to be a one-stop shop for all of your like resources. So if you have got other resources that aren't going through OpenAthens, like you've got another publisher that authenticate through username and password specific for that site, you can set up a link to it just so they've got it all in one place. This could be a good question for you, Rob. I'm going to put you on the spot with it. I'm going to ask you it anyway. Is it possible that custom SAML resources, so one-to-one resources, will be compatible with the redirector and deep linking in the future?
That is a good question. Yes, it is possible. It's not on our roadmap, so I should be very clear. It's not something we're currently building, and not something we've currently got on our roadmap, as far as I'm aware, off the top of my head, at least, unless I'm out of date. Could be. But in terms of is it possible, I don't see why not. It would depend a little bit on the resource supporting deep linking, but it's not. I don't think it's at all outside of the realm of possibility. It's something that I know has been raised, before. I think it's again, I'd probably need to defer to our product team really as to whether or not this is something that we want to look at the feasibility of and look at, how it would work. But yeah, I think it's possible, but as I say, not something we're currently have a plan to support right now.
Could we, Liv, could we put a link in the chat? I think I do this for every webinar. Our ideas board. I
Yeah, I'll
don't know
grab
if it's
that.
already on there, but our ideas board has got so if you've got ideas of a feature that you'd like to see in Open Athens, you can go and post an idea or find the idea and kind of give it a thumbs up or comment on it and that sort of thing. So we get an idea of how in demand it is. So not sure if it's already on there. I'd be surprised if it wasn't, but if it isn't, go create it. And that's somewhere that gets looked at by a product team as well. Um,
Yeah, and as I said, I should say it is possible that it's actually been been raised and is on there, and I'm just not and I've just forgotten. So it is
we
possible
don't
that
know.
it's raised already, but I don't think it's on the roadmap at the minute. But yes, that's exactly.
Rob, there's a question here that I really like, and this is something that I think a lot of people wonder but don't ask. So they said, to my knowledge, we refer to using OpenAthens and the UK Access Management Federation for our authentication. Are these two separate things? And if so, how do they differ? Or are we just using different terms for the same thing?
Yep, good. That's a very good question. So there is quite a bit of confusing terminology around these things, and JISC operates both Open Athens and the UK Access Management Federation. So they are similar but slightly different. The UK Access Management Federation is essentially a federation, so it's a collection of resources and also identity providers. I'll get too into that right now because it's probably a little bit out of scope. But long story short, is you can use Open Athens to access resources via the UK Access Management Federation. Now, what I would say to the specific person who's asked the question, in terms of how your organization is actually using Open Athens and the UK Access Management Federation, it depends. There are a few different ways you could be set up. There's lots of different ways that organizations can be set up. So you could be using you could be doing this in a few different ways rather than possibly get into that. What I would say is it's probably worth addressing the person who raised the question. It's probably worth raising a support ticket with us and just asking us to have a look at your specific setup, because we can do that, have a look and see how you're set up, and just check that it's sort of the optimal way to do it. If there's maybe a better way to do it, we can, potentially make a recommendation. But in general, you can access UK AMF resources via Open Athens, or you can access them separately via a separate identity provider, for example. And it really will be organization dependent. So, but the high level answer is that they are separate things, and they differ in so much as that both Open Athens and the UK Access Management Federation operate federations, so trusted sets of resources and organizations. Where it's slightly different is that Open Athens is also operating a service by which to access those resources, so a managed identity provider, which, as I was sort of suggesting, you can use in the UK Federation. So yeah, as I say, I think it probably is worth us potentially reviewing your setup just to see if it all makes sense. And hopefully that answer is broadly useful to anyone wondering about those same terms as well.
Thanks, Rob. Um, so Dean said it would be enormously helpful to have data for accessing the non-SAML custom resources to track the linking from starting points like MyAthens to OpenAthens. That way we could see the OpenAthens connection data along with connections to subscription resources. I mean, I think if I've understood the question correctly, like I agree, it'd be really good to kind of like see even just like that link click, how often is it clicked? Do wonder whether it'd be possible. I'm not 100% sure. Um, but
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I wouldn't like to speculate too much off the top of my head
yeah,
because
that's how I feel.
uh, I might just get it completely wrong. But I think it's an interesting idea. I think again, as George said, it's worth raising
Yeah.
the idea with our on that board,
Oh,
because
open
our product
open
team can look at it.
access. Oh, sorry. So when I've said open Athens, you mean open access. I see. To track
Oh,
the
okay.
link consultants to open access. That way we could see the open access connection data along with. I see. Yeah.
yeah, nonetheless, I'd say it's worth raising that, and it's worth us evaluating it to see if it's feasible, uh, and see how it would work, really. But if I'm understanding rightly, yeah, it sounds like a yeah, yeah. I see the proposed value. Yeah.
So the ones that we've got left, I've saved them for last because they're all slightly more off topic, so I thought I'd save them for last. So the first one is how easy is it to onboard Open Athens, especially the public library setup with multiple users and resources? I'm more than happy to cover that one. So the easiness depends massively on your setup. However, we work with many public libraries. We work with a lot of public libraries with thousands of users and a lot of resources. So we will work with you, but come talk to us, book in a demo, talk to our business development managers, and they will talk to you about how easy that would be. And it depends on the complexity of your setup and what you require of us. But I am absolutely sure we'll probably be able to make everything work. It's a bit of a cop-out answer, but contact us because it does depend. And we've got another one of, I know that today we're talking about resources. However, for me, the problem is deleting unused accounts in batch and not individually. Is that possible? Aileen, assuming that we are talking about personal accounts, like the Open Athens accounts and not accounts in your local directory. Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, you can delete those in batch and you can also set them to automatically expire and be deleted.
Yeah, that's right. I think again, that's probably is one where it's possibly worth raising a support ticket for us to have a look and see exactly what kind of accounts you're using and how you're set up. We should be able to help you with that. I think, yeah, I don't see why. I think we should be able to help you with that. Yeah, yep.
Yeah, you shouldn't be deleting everything individually. That sounds like a pain in the ice cream. So yeah, give us a shout. We'll be able to help you with that one. If you know who your account manager is, then reach out to them as well, because we would like to help you too. And to clarify, Open Athens already supports two-factor authentication for local campus existing accounts.
So to
Local
be
campus.
Yeah, so to clarify there, if you're using local accounts, depending on the type of local account, generally we redirect to your local directory and the user authenticates there. So if your local directory supports two-factor, it would be enforced there. So it wouldn't be part of the Open Athens service. It would be happening at your local directory. So that's how that works typically. So yeah. So the answer is no, we don't directly support it in the sense of actually it doesn't happen inside of our service. But if we redirect your local directory and your user has to go through two-factor or any other kind of identity verification before you can respond to us, then that's how that would be enforced.
And we've got one last question. We are not going over time, are we? No, we're okay. So last question, which I would love for our product team to be here for. So I'm going to somewhat answer it in the hopes that I don't get shouted at afterwards by our product team. They won't really. So it says a bit off topic for this webinar, but I'm curious how your team use the ideas board. i.e., is there a certain threshold of votes that causes an idea to get pushed forward? Do you consider new features on a particular schedule? And is the schedule shared with customers? I mean, Rob, do you, being our principal software engineer, do you have much more of an insight before I go AWOL and start answering everything as to how like the process works?
I can't
I know
answer all.
it's not based on how many like votes it's got to get it pushed forward. There is some sort of public roadmap somewhere, isn't there?
Yeah, so I can't answer all of the parts of that question.
Yeah.
It's totally a question. I don't know the answer to all the parts of it, but I do know that the ideas that are raised are frequently discussed by the product team and brought to the dev team for analysis to see, we look at what's feasible and what we can do. So I know that they're frequently discussed. But in terms of like what the threshold is to get an idea pushed, or what the prioritization is, I actually don't know. I'd have to defer to our product team, I'm afraid. So, but I think we could probably get an answer for you and get back to you because
Yeah,
I think we should
that's
be
a
able to do that.
really
Yeah.
good question. So let's get a proper answer from our product team and we will come back to you on that one if that's okay and get some proper parameters as to what goes on with it. And that is
I just wanted to say, sorry,
yeah, go on.
I did spot a question from David Leffler in the chat earlier on, asking if there's any changes for the reporting API coming up. Uh, Not as far as I'm aware, is the answer to that. I just want to make sure you didn't get missed. So yeah, the answer is no, not as far as I'm aware, David.
Thanks, Rob. So I've just got one last thing from me. As always, if you have more questions or would like to talk to us about any of this, please do contact us in the account management team. If you're direct customers, these are the four of us. We are a friendly bunch. Sometimes we bite, but not often. So please do just reach out to us. We want to help and we want to make sure you're getting the most out of Open Athens at the end of the day. Liv, I'll hand over to you to sign us off.
Thank you. Yeah, so just a quick thank you to Rob and Georgie for hosting today. You've been great. As I mentioned at the start of the session, we will share the recording to this webinar later on today, or it might be tomorrow, depending on how it works. I know there's been a few issues with some of the links I've shared in the chat, but I will include those in a post-event email, so you'll get them all anyway. I'm not quite sure what happened there. It doesn't seem that I think people aren't able to access the link, so I'm really sorry that that's happened. But yeah, you'll be able to access them in the email. Please do leave a survey at the end of the session. We want to make this as good as possible. And this was our last webinar in this series. We're hoping to start again in September. So if anyone's got any topics they'd like us to cover, it would be great to hear from you. And we'll keep you all updated. Sorry, Georgie.
I just saw Sam in our product team has put his hand up to want to speak, probably to answer that question.
I might be able to let him speak.
I can click allow to talk.
There we go.
Sam, are you there? You just need to unmute. Don't know if it's going to work.
I don't think. Maybe he
It was
clicked
worth
it
a
by
shot.
mistake. Maybe he said it by mistake.
Oh well, it's worth a shot. Oh no, he's gone again. It's all right, Sam. We'll get an answer from you in a minute. We'll send it out to everyone.
Yeah, well, thank you. We'll let everyone have a little bit of time back. And yeah, we'll send out all the recordings afterwards. But thank you so much, Georgie and Rob, and thank you to everyone for being engaged. See you
Bye.
soon. Bye.